Hey guys, Casey Ferris here. Thanks for checking out another video of mine here on YouTube. Today we are talking about exporting your project from DaVinci Resolve. Fair warning, this is a somewhat basic tutorial, so you might already know this if you know DaVinci Resolve, but if you're looking for the answer of how do I get my videos out into the world so that people can see them, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do that and offer some tips for making them the best that they can be. So I have a project here. This is just a random project I brought up. It's like a little vlog thing, just to show you guys some ways to export. Under the Deliver tab here in DaVinci Resolve, the default layout looks like this. You have a preview of your movie, your clips timeline, your regular timeline, your render settings over here, and your render queue. Biggest deal here is the render settings. And if I click on this little triangle button up here, I can expand this render settings window and kind of push everything over there so you can see what you're doing. Easiest way to start out is usually to pick a preset of some kind. So we're going to talk about exporting 3 different ways. First one is for YouTube. Second is going to be to bring your project back into Premiere or some other NLE. And the third way is just to export a high quality version for archiving. So first one, for YouTube, it's pretty easy to get started. All you do is click on this little YouTube logo right here, and this will bring up a preset that's pretty good for exporting your project to be uploaded to YouTube. What I like to do is twirl this down and go to 1080p because most things that I'm making are still 1080p on YouTube. And I'll change everything to the preset settings for YouTube. Format is QuickTime, codec is H.264, resolution 1920 by 1080. Frame rate should be whatever the frame rate is of your project. This one happens to be in 24. And the one thing I'd recommend playing with a little bit is this quality. Where it says restrict to, it defaults to about 10,000 kilobits per second, which is pretty good, but if you export something to YouTube, no matter what settings you use, it's going to be recompressed. And so exporting a higher quality render is a good idea. So I'm going to make this about 3 times as good. And instead of 10,000, I'm going to make it 30,000 kilobits per second. Everything else is pretty good. I can twirl down advanced settings, make sure my pixel aspect ratio and everything's right. All of this is probably fine, but if you run into trouble, take a look down here and make sure something isn't messed up. So that's good for the video portion of it. Under audio, codec linear PCM bit depth at 16, that's probably fine. And under file, this is where you're going to name your file. So I'll call this vlog-yt. You could also do fancy things like add suffixes, but I usually just type it in the custom name. You could also set this to use the name of your timeline, but I almost always use custom name. You can also tell it to go into a subfolder, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And pretty much all of this is set to a good setting from this YouTube preset. We'll be rendering this project as a single clip, which will be uploaded to YouTube. All of my settings are good. The last thing that I need to set is my render location here. And if you forget to do this and you hit add to render queue, it'll pop up and ask you, but I'm going to hit browse and pick somewhere that makes sense to put this render and hit OK. Now I have my file type and my location and all of my settings set. I can hit add to render queue. And what that's going to do is tell Resolve to render this whole project as a single movie for YouTube and put it there. Now it's not rendering yet because I have to hit start render. Things in the render queue are pretty much like a to-do list for Resolve. So the cool thing about that is that you can make multiple versions and render them all at once when you go to lunch. Let's say I also wanted to make a Vimeo 720p version. I can set all my settings and call this vlog Vimeo 720 and hit add to render queue. And then when I hit start render, it'll render both of these out. So that's pretty much how I render something for a web application like YouTube or Vimeo, right? Now let's pick the next least complicated thing, which is rendering for archive. And when I say that, I mean rendering a really high quality version of this that you might want to turn into a different format later or edit into a different project. It's just pretty much a really high quality version that you can use later if you want to. So I'm going to start with the custom preset, which pretty much doesn't change anything. And I'm going to go through and set my own settings. I'm going to keep this as a single clip. Under video, QuickTime sounds great. But under codec, I'm going to change to a higher quality codec. H.264 is really compressed, and a codec that I usually like to use for archiving because it's really high quality and pretty good on space is GoPro Cineform YUV 10-bit. It's a really nice looking codec. Make sure that your resolution and frame rate are set how you want. And under quality, this actually matters quite a bit. Depending on how worried you are about the quality, this is what you would pick. I wouldn't recommend doing least or low. Medium is pretty good. It'd be hard to tell the difference between a medium and high, but I usually go for high because best seems overkill for most projects. The file size is a lot bigger and it only looks just a tiny bit better. So I usually like to split the difference at high quality. Under advanced settings, make sure that my pixel aspect ratio is good. My data levels, I usually leave at auto and it works out fine. But anytime that you render, if your colors aren't coming out the way you thought they were, it could be this, that you either have video or full checked and it should be the other one. But I usually leave it on auto and most of the time it works. So that's good for my archive settings for video. Under audio, linear PCM is good. I might up the bit depth to 24 just to have a little bit higher quality audio. Since it is a big file for archiving, I'm not uploading this. We can afford to have some bigger file sizes. And then under file, again, you just call it whatever name you want. Call this vlog archive, choose where to put it, add to render queue, and hit start render. So these settings that I'm using here are actually pretty much the exact same settings that I use to go into another program. And so anytime that I render something out of Resolve and I want to bring it back into Premiere to add graphics or do sound mixing or whatever, I use this Cineform YUV 10-bit at high quality, and it works really well. The other really cool thing that Resolve can do is if you want to bring this project and all your graded clips into a different app, you can do so by rendering them all out and then linking it up with an XML. Easiest way to do this is scroll over to Premiere XML, and it will set all of your settings to be really good for Premiere to read as an XML. One thing is that it switches this codec to uncompressed RGB 10-bit. If it were me, you can leave it like that. It's going to be pretty big. If it were me, I would switch to Cineform YUV 10-bit with the quality at best. And one thing you may notice that changed is under render, it's now clicked to individual clips. And what that's going to do is render every single clip from here as its own movie, and it's going to put them all in a folder. And after those are all rendered, you can export an XML to bring them into Premiere or Final Cut or whatever app you use to edit video that can import an XML. Another thing I want to point out is that over here under File, it says Use Unique File Names. And what that's going to do is rename each of these clips so that they don't save over each other. If you don't click this, it will probably just render all the clips over each other and you'll just end up with the last clip, which would suck. So everything there is good. One thing I will do is add a subfolder, and I can call this Clips and hit Add to Render Queue. And so this adds this job to the render queue, and now I can hit Start Render to render all the individual clips. And we can see as it goes through each clip and renders it, it adds the separate clips to that clips directory where we told it to put them. All right, so now that everything is rendered, it's time to export our XML. This is where it gets really annoying and confusing because they built it, I don't know why they built it this way, but here's what you do, okay? You go back to the Edit tab, and on the Edit tab, this doesn't work if you're not on the Edit tab, go up to File, Export Aaf Xml. And now you can pick where you want your new XML to live, pick some place that makes sense, and depending on what app you're going to be putting this into, I'm going to be using Premiere, so I'm just going to pick regular XML file. If you use Final Cut, you might want to pick FCP XML, but I'm just going to pick regular XML, and I'll call this vlog XML, and hit Save. Now that all your stuff is rendered and you've exported your XML, you're done in Resolve, so save your project and close it. Inside of Premiere, it's really easy to import all of those shots into your timeline. All you have to do is find your XML and drag it into your project, and it'll make a folder, and inside that should be a timeline, which you can double click and open up, and it will have your graded footage in it. This looks like a horrible thing happened, but what actually happened is our sequence settings were set to UHD and our render is 1080. So I can set that in my sequence settings inside of Premiere, hit OK, and everything's fine. So this is great because it links all of your graded footage and keeps your clips split up if for some reason you need to work with separate clips inside of your NLE. It's a really slick way to work. I've done a lot of projects this way, and it's a pretty flexible workflow. So there you go. That's how to render stuff out of DaVinci Resolve. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. If you like this, hit like. And for more post-production tutorials, color grading, DaVinci Resolve tutorials, make sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. My name again is Casey Ferris. I will catch you next time.